Hello everyone, I'm Drifting, and today I want to talk about the state of web novels in 2024. So it's been a while since I've made a video, 4 months. So to get back into things, I kind of wanted to do a low risk, but still kind of grand and ambition video about the current state of web novels at the current moment. Um, so instead of covering a specific, web novel title, I'm just going to go over where we are. So recently I've been reading a lot of Korean web novels, titles such as Seal Station Druid, which is a sequel by the author of Seal Station Necromancer, All Time Master, Trash Eating Great Wizard. And the two titles is Academy Veterans Eat Everything, which is an Academy web novel, and another one called Catch the Golden Goblin, Become a Mythical Hunter. That's a fun tower regressor sort of story to it. Two Korean web novels I want to particularly highlight is Level Negative 99 Archmage. Similar to Returnee's Magic Must Be Special, it has a lot of magic focus to it, but it's very unique in its lit RPG aspects of like a VR MMO, various achievement systems. And it reminds me of starting from level one, the Russian lit RPG on Royal Road, kind of just subversive in the route it goes through. The other Korean web novel I wanted to highlight is Financer, Director on the Verge of Bankruptcy. A similar academy story to The Villain Wants to Live, um, or Surviving the Academy 30 Years Have Passed Since the Prologue. Various trope subversions, a little bit of a nitty gritty character background, right? Similar to Isaac, but it's a fun story with a little bit of romance in it as well. Chinese titles I've recently read is Don't Confiscate My Citizenship, 不许没收我的荣泽. So that recently finished in November. Just a fun, lighthearted comedy story. And then What's the Crash I'm Playing Normally? That is one of the titles in the weirdness games trend that is in Chinese web novels at the moment. Stuff like Low Health Player, Welcome to My Hell. A lot of weirdness games have become really popular. Things like Weirdness Absolute Game, Weirdness Game Designer. That's like a murder horror game that's pretty popular as well. The two unique titles in Chinese web novels I particularly enjoyed is 我不是文豪, so I'm not a literary giant, similar to The Novelist Who Left Through Time or The Great Storyteller, really in depth into like the writing system. In Japanese, it would be Bakuman, right? The mangaka system in like animation and how these works come into life. And then a casual web novel, a slice of life called Return to the Island and Live a Leisurely Life. Similar to starting from 2012, it's a regressor do-over web novel, or Rebirth is like those flowing years where it's just talking about, a beautiful childhood. So that's kind of like some fun stories I've been going over. Other titles I read daily, besides Low Health Player, is This Is Not a Mechanical Ascension. That's kind of like starring Tunner, an interstellar sort of character. They're All Real. Similar to Are They All Fairies is kind of this like romance entwined story with like a regressor aspects to it. Evil Dragon, the baby dragon wants to be a queen, is just a slice of life story, just a lighthearted one. Various fan fictions as well, whether it's like Detective Conan, One Piece, Pokemon, Naruto, Bleach. I read a couple of Chinese web novels in that genre. Stuff like Conan is not a brain option. There's a Phoenix Wright, Ace Wright one. Conan the Victor is Justice. That's a lawyer one that's really cool. Blends the line between gray and justice. Phantom Thief of Hearts, but Conan, Persona Conan fanfiction crossover. I'm Not a Snake Disease. I kind of dropped because it just got too long and convoluted, but it was a good thing while it lasted. Stay With Me Conan, and I'm trying to think, is there any other Conan ones off the top of my head? Pirates build a big wall from the beginning. That's kind of industrialization, One Piece fan fiction. Subverting the Akatsuki organization. That's a Naruto fan fiction. Always really fun. And then Elf Team Rainy Day. Elf Rainy Day Team. That's a Pokemon fan fiction. Bleach I Choose Aizen. That's Bleach fan fiction. Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh fan fictions are always really popular. It's always a fun route to read these various worlds. Detective Conan is one of my favorite world views that I enjoy reading. One Piece is also fun as well. Along the weirdness games, there's one that I read consistently now that Confiscate My Citizenship is finished, called Paradise Abyss and Allow Idle Wanderers. Weirdness game always is a fun Chinese trend, a web novel trend at the moment, so I thought that was pretty fun to read. Right. What's the crash I'm playing the game normally used to go by the title. I turned my entire family into paper figurines. It's a very fun comedy weirdness game, so I highly recommend that title. So go read that after the video. So yeah, let's talk about the current web novel industry at the moment. So some of the web novel, there's a lot more web novel YouTubers now. You have Weaver, who does a lot of Lord of Mysteries content. One of the newer web novel YouTubers that started publishing videos is Mr. Mysteries. Also Lord of Mysteries content. Great videos, by the way. He does great video editing. One video that was recently published by Moonquill called The Rise of Web Fiction did a great deal in covering the history of English web fictions and web publishing, starting all the way back to fan fiction to sites like Wattpad and Quotev, where it talked about like the English publishing contract system for web novels and web fictions as a whole. It talked about the transition from 2016 to the 2019-2020 more harsher termed contracts by web novel. They discuss a lot about Chinese and Korean web novels and not as much on Japanese light novels. So that's one issue it had. And it didn't go too much into corporate structure, but there's only so much a video can cover. But they did a great job covering the history of English web fictions. So I highly recommend this particular video. Moonquill did a great job on that. And then some other web novel content creators I came across is Penshaw. So he used to go by the YouTube handle Novel Fantasy. Now he acquired the Korean YouTube handle. There's a lot of Korean web novels. It's all native Korean, so get your Google Translate and read the transcripts. But if you want like a web novel review of a popular Korean title, he's probably the guy to check out. Butterfly Valley also changed his YouTube handle to his a YouTuber title. So I'm not too familiar with his work, but I know he does make web novel content, so that's a really cool one. And then a web novel YouTuber, Chinese content creator that I recently discovered on Bilibili is Cang Lao Shi Tui Su. I came across a Chinese science fiction web novel I was not too sure about. It was called Darkening Frequency, a science fiction spy war web novel. It's relatively short, only 63 chapters, um, but it has multiple books. I haven't read this, so I kind of wanted to get a feel for whether it was good or not. And this guy was a content creator that made a video on it, so he consistently makes Chinese web novel reviews, which gives me hope that he knows what he's talking about. And so that's kind of cool. I know there's probably others, but this is the guy that I'm most familiar with. So if you want to look for Chinese web novels, this guy would probably have covered it before. Yeah, science fiction has always been a favorite genre of mine in terms of like it's super complicated, and you can get a very complicated plot, but if the terms are too convoluted, it gets a little bit confusing. So you need to balance the complicated systems with a good story, right? To make sure it's still readable. So one of my favorite authors in the science fiction genre is Caihong Zimeng, A Rainbow Gate. He published titles like Earth Era, 地球纪元, and 星河. So great titles. 明日未灵, Tomorrow Hasn't Arrived, Superstars of Tomorrow, all great science fiction titles. Moving on, let's discuss some of the publishers of the web novel industry. I kind of categorize the web novel industry as the era of the three kingdoms. Before, it was much more individual sites and translations and was a huge mess. Nowadays, we've kind of conglomerated into major site publishers. The first company we're going to visit is Naver. This is this huge Korean tech giant, similar to the Google of Korea. It's Korea's search engine. They also own the Korea's largest social media platform, Line. And they recently bought out a company called moonquill back in 2020. This was originally the site that published Solo Leveling. That's what it's famous for. So it kind of has this old Apple bookstore design to it. Very simplistic. The reason why I say this UI is a little bit old, this is actually one of my favorite series, The Novelist Who Left Through Time. Used to Google Translate. It's still really readable. The problem with it, though, is if you go to read a chapter, right, it still uses PNGs to read a chapter. So a lot of Korean sites will use PNG embeddings. So you'll see that on Japanese sites as well, but mostly on Korean sites. So you have to go to Google Translate to actually read some of the words. which is a limiting factor for foreign readers. There are other sites you can read stories like the next one, Kakao. But yeah, moonquill has some issues with readability, but it's owned by Naver. Naver, as you can tell, is known as the green universe because they own a lot of these green icon companies. And one green icon company is Webtoons. This is where you get a lot of Korean animations from. Itaewon Classroom, Hooky, which was turned into a graphic novel. Solo Leveling was originally Webtoons here. They have a really good content creator system to publish Webtoons, which is really cool. Um, so yeah, Webtoons is owned by Naver. And also under their umbrella is Wuxia, translation site. The reason why their icon's not green but it's white and black is because it was originally a Hong Kong translation. They acquired it in 2020. And if you look at reading it, it goes through a traditional web novel system where you have the chapter and then chapter comments at the bottom, which is cool. They also own Wattpad, which is the home of fan fiction, such as like 50 Shades of Grey and Harry Potter. Now, the next site for this era of Three Kingdoms publishers is Kakao. Kakao has a very mobile first UI web design. Um, so it influences their English site Tapas, which has a similar mobile design. If we go to Webnovels and we go to their ranking system, I really like Tapas's ranking system. It's quite nice actually with the mobile system. Their desktop has some issues. I wouldn't say these are the most popular of all the Korean web novels because I'm not too familiar with all of them. The only one I'm familiar with is this merchant one. So it's pretty much an enclosed garden of their own ecosystem. But yeah, among Korean publishers, there's a lot of different publishers. So they all have to license from a lot of different publishers. You have JHS, you have KW Books, you have Golem Factory, Reedy Books. So usually they publish on all these publishing sites, right? Kakao is one of them. Moonpia is one of them. The other two is Novelpia and Jawara, which are special in their own right, and I'll get to in a little bit. But let's stick with Kakao for right now. So what's nice about Kakao, let's go to level -99 Archmage. What's really nice about Kakao is their reading system. They, similar to iBooks, use this side-to-side page reading system, which is really nice. You can even change the text sizes. Shikia has a similar system as well, which we'll get into in a little bit, but you can adjust it, and it's quite nice to read. So I like their Kakao is a really nice UI interface. Tapas is a similar style. And one particular thing about Tapas is that it has a very easy publishing system, right? You go to publishers, you go to contests. Tapas does a great job with their contests for creators. They have great UI, great reach on social media compared to some of the other web novel publishers. So yeah, Kakao is usually using these yellow icons. Now, the other Korean web novel publishers, I'm focusing a lot in Korea because this is one I'm not too familiar with, is Novelpia and Jawara. Now, these two host some of the most famous Korean web novel competitions. So a lot of new writers will publish these sites, Novelpia and Jawara, and compete. Jawara has one of the nicest UI designs. I really like it. It's a simplified web novel UI, but it's much nicer. And a lot of the titles I'm really familiar with, right? And I really, the only gripe I have is this banner, which uses PNGs. So you have to use Google Translate to translate the term. But you can very easily click on it and figure out what is what, right? So this is the contest tab. They every year they do a pretty popular contest, and newer writers will publish here. But if you even look at the ranking system, I really like the rankings because you can easily tell the top Korean web novel trends, right? So an interesting Korean web novel trend, if you look at the top 100 Korean web novel, is I want to be a YouTuber. Number 18 is I'm a YouTuber, and then number 20 also is YouTuber. So YouTuber has now become a popular Korean web novel trend. We've seen that a lot with streaming as far back as Legendary Moonlight Sculptor and Arc, where streaming and content creation was a way to make money. But nowadays, like this VTuber culture is starting to become popular. So it's one of those ideas where places where fiction starts to imitate reality. I recently read a Korean web novel about an exorcist that was from another world that came to be a VTuber streamer, right, to punish all the heretics. And it's very interesting to see a lot of these YouTube focused web novels, right? Hidden Corner Music Genius and whatnot. Um, Game Director Returns from Hell. Those are much more employment web novels, and we're starting to see a lot of these YouTuber trends as well. Jawar is another site that's really popular. I like their site design, but I'm not too familiar with it. They host a lot of web novel competitions. So this is another major publisher as well. Reedy Books is another one. And so that about concludes it for the Korean web novel industry. Now we're going to move on to some others. Lection is used to be a very famous one. They post a lot of romance comics as well. They were really big. I still think they are. They have some great art, but they are a little getting out competed a little by Naver and Webtoons and Kakao. Right? Kakao is their own comics. They're pretty famous for romance. Tapas is actually famous for publishing the beginning after the end. Right? So um, they published here first. They got their comic here, and Tapas has a really good contest system. So Qidian is the Chinese web novel system. There's a lot of publishers in Chinese web novels as well. You have Zongheng, Feilu, which is fan fiction, Fanxie, which is tomato reading. But Qidian is the big conglomerate in the Chinese web novel landscape. So this is like one of the three kingdoms. And they have this old bookstore. They have decent banners and UI. It's a little bit cluttered, but you can see the leaderboards here. Don't Confiscate My Citizenship recently finished. It's pretty nice. The reason why I like Qidian particularly, besides it's easy to navigate with Google Translate, is it's very easy to spot Chinese web novel trends in popular novels. I recognize all these titles similar to as I did on Kakao. Whereas when I went on Tapas, on Novelpia. But like you see Ring of Fate, Circle of Inevitability. This is the follow-up or sequel to Lord of Mysteries by that author. But a lot of these titles are pretty popular. Not all of them are going to be popular, but I recognize quite a lot. This one I've seen quite a long time be popular, but I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it. Name of Eternity is similar to Apocalypse Forest, which is really popular. You'll see a lot of popular titles here, so I'm pretty satisfied with the novel ranking here and how they do search recommendations. So Qidian, I'd say, is pretty reliable in terms of that. Um, On to the not so good part. Qidian, which is Tencent, China Literature, they're doing an audiobook company called Nova Beats, and then they also own Webnovel, which is a really nice site. Webnovel has used to be a translation site similar to Wuxia World, but is much more focused on English web novel publishing, so native English writers will write here. Besides their competitions, which I don't particularly like, just because you can, they use this like full page PNG, which I don't particularly enjoy, and it doesn't look amazing from a reader perspective, but I'll get into why it's so popular with writers in a little bit. And even their novels ranking, while not bad, if you like look at the all-time right, Shadow Slave, Mech Touch, um, Supreme Magus. These are all My Vampire System. These are all pretty popular titles. These just aren't titles that I would necessarily read. As I said before, they've focused on a more English publishing direction, so you can kind of see why they chose that route. But compared to what they used to publish translation-wise with Superstars of Tomorrow, The Legendary Mechanic, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, they've definitely just changed direction, and so I'm a little bit sad about that. The other thing about competitions is if you go to their most popular yearly competition, right, the Spirity Awards, the WSA, some of their links are broken, so you kind of have to know where to go. This is championed back in COVID where they wanted to publish like a TV and anime series. They were trying to compete with Webtoons, right? So they would publish these yearly Spirity Awards. This is where they give away like $1 million or something. That was their huge gimmick. And they'd publish these huge popular titles. The reason why web novel is so popular is because they provide this professionalized contract system. Web novel emulates their contracts based on Qidian, and this is where web fictions changed from like free writing for, I think the term is generating electricity for love, like on Royal Road, to more professional contracts. So you get a lot better writing, but the contract terms are pretty strict. That's what everyone has complaints with web novel. It's professional, and but people have complaints on whether it's fair or not. So, some would describe it as draconian or harsh, but it definitely professionalized the industry. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, that's web novel as a whole. Decent UI. I feel it's a little bit cluttered, but it's interesting. Moving on, we're going to actually let's start with Japanese first. Or actually, let's go to the English first. Next up, we have the Royal Road ecosystem. So this is where a lot of English web fictions are published. This is where progressive fantasy started out with. Lit RPGs is really popular on Royal Road. They are affiliated with Amazon in some way, I guess a little bit Audible. So a lot of English web fictions will go to publish on Kindle, right? So this is where the Kindle self-publishing is, Amazon publishing. And yeah, they have a really nice UI design, updates, rising stars. It's pretty easy to navigate. Mother of Learning, Perfect Run by Void Herald or Maximine L. Girard, very popular titles. Here's what I mean by lit RPGs. Lit RPGs are known for these game panels, right? And Royal Road makes it very easy to type these game panels. So titles like Shovel and Spades or Rendility Ghost Hound were made popular in Royal Road, right? Azarinth Healer and whatnot. A lot of these, Beware of Chicken. A lot of these titles started off on Royal Road, and then they eventually, published a Kindle. That's the contract system for Royal Road. There's other sites like Quotev and Top Web Fiction where you can publish English, or you could publish on independent sites like Worm. But Royal Road is definitely the home of a lot of lit RPGs and progressive fantasy and that whole genre as a whole. So that's one of the major English web fiction publishing sites alongside Scribble, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Moving on to Japanese light novels, there's a huge lot of Japanese web novel publishers such as Shogakukan, Shonen Jump, Viz Media, Seven Seas Entertainment. The one I'm most familiar with is Syoseru. This is the amateur light novel publishers, right? So a lot of light novels will be published here, which is owned by Kadokawa, which actually may be owned by Sony now, according to Atria. But yeah, Kadokawa owns Yen Press as well as Geeks Plus, which is known for trash taste. And I always like to look at science fiction because science fiction, as I said before, has a lot of in-depth plot. Now, I have a little bit of gripes because not all of it is science fiction. Like Overlord is much more VR MMO. Penguin Highway is pretty good. Place Promise in early days. No Game, No Life. This one is much more magic, but I guess there's some science fiction. I always preferred interstellar science, sci-fi, but Yen Press has some pretty good titles. So this is one of the major publishers among the ones I mentioned before, Viz Media. I'm not too familiar with Japanese light novels, although I have read some, like Starting Over, Dungeon Meshi. A lot of those light novels didn't get turned into manga and anime, so that's that whole thing. I highly recommend if you want to read Japanese light novels, Syoseru is where you would look for it. And then moving on, we have databases, right? Usually you want, as I mentioned before, a lot of web novel sites have their own ranking system, and that's specifically for their web novels. There is no comprehensive site to view the most popular web novels. You kind of just have to know what it is, right? My anime list is mostly restricted to anime. So there's no, you can find web novel titles here, but this is not really where you would go for rankings. Goodreads is another place to find it, but this is traditionally traditional books. So a lot of Barnes and Noble titles, you would find it here. If you want to read summaries, you go to Baidu for Chinese web novels and NamuWiki, which is kind of the fandom for Korean web novels. But the site most people use to find web novels is Novel Updates. This is this huge database of translated web novels. And you can see here they're affiliated with Scribblehub, another smaller publishing site competing with some of these bigger giants. Similar to Legend Comics, it's fine for amateur publishing, right? Similar to Wattpad, and I think it's nice. I like the site design. It's just very homey and it's not too complicated. I just don't know whether it'll be able to compete with like Tapas and Web Novel and Webtoons and Wuxia World, which has a lot more money, tech giant money, and so on and so forth. Um, Even Royal Road has, Amazon behind it. The other database site would be Douban, which is this Chinese Goodreads or IMDb. So that has Chinese movies and like web novels as well. It's a comprehensive site. But there's no major database. You may have like various independent database sites, but I haven't seen a dedicated one, although there may be some in the works. So yeah, that's about the state of web novel industry as a whole. Before we finish, I kind of want to discuss some of the UI and the reading experiences. Right, web novel, you have this top-down reading experience. So if you read a web novel, it's kind of scroll. It's very mobile heavy. It's comment section at the bottom, voting systems. You can comment on specific passages, which I think is very interesting. But let's go on to the writer systems. As I mentioned before, Tapas has the nicest competitions. I think they have the most well organized competitions out of all of them. I wouldn't say in terms of UI. It's pretty nice, pretty easy, good for discoverability. Um, but if you go to something like writing systems, right? If you go to the Tapas writing system, it's pretty simplistic design, very easy to use, right? Kind of high tech. Compare that with like Scribble Hub, very basic, right? Most writers use Google Docs and then, publish their chapters here. So this is what publishing a chapter looks like for writing and whatnot. That's where you would write stuff. Out of all of them, I find Inkstone by Webnovel is the most professional. Cheer reads. Webnovel has the most professional writing system. They have all this writing content here for you to read. They explain how to write how to sign a contract, ways to improve your writing, and even their oh shoot, even their writing system's pretty high level. Let me sign in really quickly. So yeah, if we write a chapter, right, it's pretty out of the way. You can tell they put a lot of effort in design. Well, they bought the company and then they designed the website to be easy to publish. So you can tell web novel I think is miles ahead of the competition for web novel writing and the contract system to sign a contract, um, to publish a contract. So whatever people's opinions are on the web novel contract system, I think it's relatively professional. Whether it's fair or not is a different story. But yeah, they definitely put a lot of resources into the publishing system. So that's what I think makes web novel ahead of its competition. But each web novel site has its own niche to it. Each of them has its own industry, and that really makes it a very interesting web novel landscape that we are in 2024. You have these Chinese sites, you have these Korean sites, all competing to publish web novels and create the next Solo Leveling, the next King's Avatar. Then and it's very fun to see. I'm very hopeful that the genre of animation will continue to grow alongside Japanese animation. So I'm pretty hopeful. It's pretty cool to see, and that's the state of web novels in 2024. But yeah, so